Thanks everybody for coming here, and I think you're going to find out that we've got some of the world's leading transportation experts here. And I've known all these people for about 10 years or plus. Dr. Susan Shaheen, who's co-director of the Institute for Transportation Studies. I've got Eric Cahill here, who is the founder and a director of Adaptive Consulting. Sue Zielinski, who does so many things that are amazing in integrating transportation modes across the globe. And Dr. Scott Samuelson, who I've worked with for a long time. And he runs ZevNet, and that I believe is the longest running last mile transportation car sharing program in the world. So the 1990s were very busy for Toyota. We were busy developing the Prius, and we developed a little car called the Ecom. And we saw a long time ago that as cities grow, they grow out of cars. The cars don't fit, as you heard from the deputy mayor of Amsterdam. Cars don't fit in the existing infrastructure. So we started looking at what we could do, and we developed a little two-seat electric car called the Ecom, and we developed some telematics around it. But this was 1996, and so we didn't have the iPhone applications and the things like that to make it work. But Toyota took a chance, so did Nissan, and we worked in Kyoto, we worked in Irvine, and we started that process. And that process has gone and continued to this day. And now we're looking directly at car sharing, at peer-to-peer car sharing. And the little cars that you'll see downstairs, one is a Toyota, and we've developed that specifically to experiment with. And you'll see it in experiments all around the United States to look at how different people, how we can do car sharing, how we can do peer-to-peer. We'll also do experiments in Japan and Europe. The other car is that I'd like you all to look at is a Think. The company is no longer in business, but it was designed as an urban car, and it has aspects that are quite a bit different than the Toyota car. So it's interesting, and what I'd like to do now is get started. We have not so much time, and we've got some really good people here. So I'm going to take a seat here and get on my iPad. And I've got a question for Dr. Shaheen here. What are the major trends in mobility that you're seeing emerge? And are these going to be locally realized? Are they nationally defined? I know globally defined. And how can we share the pieces back and forth to get economy of scale?
Well, thanks, Bill. But before I even start with that, I want to thank you and Gordon Feller for getting the Meetings of the Minds started. I was a participant in the first one in Oakland, California, and I will say it's grown tremendously, and it's a really wonderful thing to see. So, to get to Bill's question about mobility trends, so one of the things we've been involved at UC Berkeley for quite some time, well over, close to actually 2 decades now, is looking at the concept of shared use mobility. And this trend is really starting to take hold worldwide. We're seeing tremendous developments in phenomenon like public bike sharing, where we're seeing this concept just take hold and go from city to city to city. In North America, we've seen it grow to over 20 IT, information technology-based systems, and there's over 200 programs worldwide. These systems don't seem to be doing anything but taking off and growing. Some of them are so big that they have 70,000 bikes in them. That's the Wuhan system in China, just to give you a sense. The Vélib system in Paris has around 20,000 bikes, and many of you may have heard that New York City is planning in spring of 2013 to launch its program with approximately 10,000 bikes as its end state goal. So that just gives you a sense that there are some global trends going on here. The scale does differ based on the nations that are pursuing it or the cities that are pursuing it. China's government has really gotten into bike sharing. It is the kingdom of the bicycle, and so it's not surprising to see that when they go into public bike sharing, it's on a really massive scale. In terms of car sharing, it got started in 1948 in Switzerland and really started to take off in Europe in the mid to late 1980s. In North America, it got started in 1994, in Canada, and in Portland, Oregon in 1998. We now have 44 programs here, and we are collecting the totals for members, and I will report that we're really close to the million member mark in North America, which is, I think, a pretty significant milestone for us. In October of 2010, we reported that there were about 1.25 million people worldwide car sharing. So you can see that once I get those numbers in for October 2012, because we collect them every 2 years, it's going to be well over 1.5 or greater, I anticipate. So things are really, really changing. They do have different flavors regionally, locally. I think that's a really tremendous thing. Another concept that Bill mentioned is the peer-to-peer car sharing concept. And this is the idea where you can actually put your own personal vehicle into a car sharing fleet. Some people are really nervous about the concept. I'm excited about it because it's an opportunity to expand the size of the car sharing network virtually overnight. There are opportunities, there are obstacles that have to be addressed, but this is an opportunity to go even outside of dense urban areas where public bike sharing, where car sharing tend to be the most popular concepts, working in those areas because you've got the density and the transit network. But with peer-to-peer car sharing, there's the potential to go into many other areas, and including rural areas. So there's great potential. In terms of P2P, as of April 2012, there were 33 programs worldwide, and about 10 of them are here in North America, and some of the countries where this seems to be taking off the best are actually European countries. I think it has something to do with culture as well as litigious nature. Perhaps in North America we're a bit more litigious, and so we have to be a little bit more concerned about insurance issues, and there may be more fear of trust to address. But overall, I think there are global trends, Bill, but I do think that each of these concepts has the ability to shape and reflect the cultures in the local areas where they're being deployed.
Thank you so much. Next gentleman over here is Eric Cahill. I met him several years ago. We worked together on the Future Transportation Fuel Study for the Department of Energy, reporting to Steve Chu. That study took about 400 people. It lasted for really the best part of 3 miserable years. We just finished it. We looked at future transportation fuels out to 2050. Eric helped me greatly on the electric subgroup, and he also helped with new business models. Before that, before being an adaptive, he helped develop the powertrain for the Fisker Karma and did the X Prize. So he's very, very interested, X Prize for automobiles, he's very, very interested in disruptive technologies, so I'm going to punish him with a disruptive technology question. Eric, when we think about the future of the automobile, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, even 10 years from now, or even sooner, what are the areas do you think are ripe to see disruptive technology?
Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate the invitation here, and I appreciate the question. And I'm happy to take on the challenge of disruptive innovation. I know that phrase is thrown about quite a bit. And one of the key takeaways that I got, and I think many of us from our participation in that study, in the Future Transportation Fuel Study, is that within our existing paradigm, within the dealer sales model that we live today, that we all know and love today, we are not going to see anything that looks like disruption over the next probably several decades. We might see some penetration that could see us, I don't know, at some of the optimistic scenarios, maybe 20, 30, or 40% penetration for electric vehicles and other alternatives. By 2050, by mid-century, and we all know that's not going to do it for us in terms of meeting our greenhouse gas emissions targets, and some of the pressures globally and political pressures and the like. So there is increasing attention to the concept of innovation processes. What is it going to take to transform industry? What's it going to take to transform the markets to embrace these technologies? And I think some of the things that were discussed earlier in the earlier panel spoke to that, where we're seeing innovation at all levels. And I think there's a few things that are fundamentally different today, because we've tried things in the past. We've tried, Bill mentioned a couple of technologies that were tried in the past, and one of my colleagues, Dan Sperling at the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis, likes to call the fuel du jour scenario where, every decade we have a solution, the magic, the silver bullet that's going to solve it for all of us, whether that's a hydrogen fuel cell car or an electric vehicle or natural gas car or whatever. But the bottom line here is that it's not just about the technology. I mean, first of all. And secondly, it's not 1990, it's not 2000, we're in 2012, and a lot has changed. Number one being connectivity, and that's a key theme of this conference. And ubiquitous connectivity, which is something that we're approaching within the next decade or two, is something that can fundamentally revolutionize how we know the automobile today. And I think that's going to come in the form of much more choice for consumers. This is going to be achieved through new business models that are unlocked by many of these technologies that didn't exist before. And some of these business models we're already seeing in action today. And these are some key signs that disruption is a possibility. It's already underway. There's waves that are, I guess you could say, ripples that are just now, being dropped in the water, in the pond. And these could grow into tidal waves ultimately. And one place that's ripe for this certainly is in emerging markets and in dense megacities, where you've got not only technology, you've got opportunity, you've got the will of many governments with, I think, far more authority than we do in the U.S. To accelerate change. And frankly, I'm very hopeful that we're going to see a wide variety of cars that take advantage of various alternative fuel technologies, including electrification and connectivity. And this is going to unleash, expanded functionality for many of us in terms of what a car is and what it can do for us. And ultimately, it's going to be done at a cheaper price, and it's going to grow multiple markets, so that it will expand the pie for everybody. So bottom line is, what I'm optimistic about is we're going to see, I think, a lot more choice at a lower cost. We're going to have a better experience traveling at a lower cost. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Next to Eric is Sue Zielinski. She's from SMART out of the University of Michigan. She sent me a thing about her passions, and I just have to read it because it's so cool. She's passionate about moving money, understanding and mobilizing across new mobility in industrial markets, crowdsourcing, understanding, connecting, and supporting global network of new mobility entrepreneurs and enterprises, new business models and innovations that can serve the urban poor. And I'm very, very interested in that. It's great for us to sit here, wealthy enough to travel here, but if you're struggling to get by day, how do you get into sustainable mobility there? And Susan actually is on the ground doing that. Connecting the dots, engaging the stakeholders, and moving minds and moving policy. Some of the stuff she does is amazing. Susan has living laboratories throughout the world where she dedicates her time. So for you who don't know her, I'm going to ask Susan I know you've been tremendously busy with the living laboratories. Can you tell us what you're doing there and how it's working?
Sure. You can hear me? Well, actually, the living laboratories are sort of like tech transfer in a way. I think some of us in the room think about, by the way, before I even start, I wanted to echo Susan's comment and appreciation of Meeting of the Minds. I was looking out, and though I can't see you now, what I know is many of you are now friends and colleagues and partners in some of these living lab projects and some of the projects we do because of Meeting of the Minds. And really, that's the way of the future. So in terms of the living labs and why we do it, University of Michigan, you'd think it's a university. We start with research. What we wanted to do is say, okay, we know that we need to be shifting from this kind of 20th century heavy infrastructure, single mode approach and sort of working on cars, tweaking cars, alternative fuels, all of which is good. But we're moving from that into a lighter, more dynamic, nimble systems approach, linking all the modes, all the services, all the technologies, and the various designs and infrastructures. So Friedman might say transportation is flat. We're working into this new mobility grid, where what you have is an integrated system that really serves all users. So you can move seamlessly from one mode to the other. And IT has really supported that. Is there something I'm doing? Should I hold it farther away? Or does this work better?
Not you.
It's Gordon's fault.
So we know that's the case, but one of the things that happens when we visit these different regions and when we work together is actually how do we do that? Because you can't start with one thing when you're trying to do a system. You have to build a hologram and have that create demand and work outwards. So we began by bringing together the different stakeholders who were key. And the first thing we learned was that that's really rare, that the stakeholders across the different kind of segments, like the technologies, the services, the designs, they don't necessarily talk to each other. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because they're focused on that one thing. So when we bring these people together, we actually map the inventory of what's already connected. What is the new mobility grid that exists in that region or in that particular community? And you can do this on a really small scale or a region-wide scale. And when you do that, you start to say, well, then how do we implement this? And what happens when you start to take that inventory and when you start to think about it as a new mobility grid, it's linking the shared services, it's linking the bicycles, the transit, the electric vehicle plug-in stations, the airports, the boats. And when you begin to see it this way, and when you begin to start these partnerships across the sectors, and with the big businesses that are rethinking themselves, like, for example, Ford rethinking of itself as a mobility company, like Cisco and IBM working on ways to make these connections from a transportation point of view, and like small entrepreneurs and startups and VCs that are working on these solutions like from apps and traffic management, integrated fare payment, integrated wayfinding, all the way to local services that connect the dots and link, that can move between the public systems and the private systems. So what we try and do is accelerate the process of implementing these systems. And the first step is to understand that. The second step is to map what's there. And then the third step is to build on what's there and identify the systems that are most efficient and optimized so that you won't have things where you have a bus rapid transit that's running on top of a subway system, for example. You're not duplicating efforts. It's extremely cost effective. And it's something where those regions and those businesses are spending the money already on the projects that they're doing. So it's a real leverage and optimization, similar to meeting of the minds, but from a very much of a systems point of view. And the second thing that we do in regard to that is to say, well, what are the economic benefits and opportunities? So beyond the regional economic competitiveness and beyond some of the job creation and cost savings that you get from such a systems approach, you also have this emerging Silicon Valley of new mobility. Back in 2002, in Toronto, we did a study on the emerging industry, and it was really kind of a back of the envelope, wow, there's an industry here, just as you had mentioned. Now, it's completely showing itself worldwide, and what regions can do from a very customized point of view is identify what is their particular industry cluster. And in the industry cluster, so much beyond manufacturing and energy and utilities, it moves into this whole range of IT, real estate, tourism, a whole range of different industries that form a cluster. So we are beginning to build platforms for doing the process of piloting integrated systems. We're also trying to build platforms for economic mapping, identifying the economic opportunities region by region digitally. And the last thing that we're doing in these living labs is, and different things in different places because it has to be customized to those needs, is to think about moving minds. How do people make decisions? Why do really people move? It's not simply to go from A to B. And their sole motivation is not the price of the trip. It's very much about status. It's very much about beauty, convenience, all those things of a city. So we look at how do people make decisions? How do we also begin to think not how do you choose between a bus versus a car or a bicycle versus a car, but how do you choose between just a car or a bus versus a whole portfolio of options that are seamlessly connected? How do you decide about taking on this system? What are the factors that are important? Then how do we, as developers of these, build these systems that support all of those needs, and how do we market them and talk about them? Now, I think about that as moving minds. So we've begun this process. It's early days. We started this at the same time as Meeting the Minds started. Actually, about a year after. We started in 2007 working in India in 3 different cities, then moved to South Africa, Brazil, the Philippines, the US, and now we're starting to work in China. And we do different things in different places according to what they need to do. But in all cases, we bring together a range of players, and we always try and map out what's already there first and build on what's there. I don't know if I'll just finish. Has anyone here been in a frustrating transportation-related meeting? Yeah, what my experience has been that in transportation, we really like to talk about what's not working. And so it's quite shocking, so basically a 2-hour meeting, an hour and 45, you'll have talked about all the things that are terrible. And then the last 15, you go, oh no, we were supposed to come up with solutions, laundry list comes out, and then someone puts up their hand and says, voice of reason, we have to prioritize. And prioritizing's not the name of the game here. If you're looking at a system, what you want to see is how all the stuff works together. It's like as if God were to say to you, do you want a heart or a lung or a pituitary gland? You'd say, I kind of want all of them, and I want them to work together. So really what we're trying to do is say, okay, let's look at what we're proud of, what's really great, what's really working, build on that, identify both the small things that can happen, like, oh, I never knew that so many zip cars were so close to all my bus stops. So the head of Transport Board of Washington, D.C. said that. We could just move those over, or we could just shift the bus stop. Tiny little things that make a huge difference for the user. Also comprehensive things where you can have a whole cloud traffic management system that can integrate all of these things. You can have a whole corridor transit system that can support a whole number of different needs. So that's just a quick snapshot of what we do in those living labs and where we do them, and I think I've run out of time.
Thank you, Susan. Next is Dr. Scott Samuelson, and Scott and I have been friends for, I think, 2 decades now, something like that. His bio does not do him justice. I will tell you something that's not in his bio. He just recently developed, invented, had the foresight and the ability to engage a high-temperature fuel cell with the wastewater treatment plant. So what he does now is what's called trigeneration. He generates electricity from the sewage digestive gas that normally would be burnt or just go up in the air. He also recovers the heat for processing the sewage digesting gas, and has a slipstream of hydrogen. So it's really zero carbon hydrogen. It's not a dream. It really works. We've got hydrogen stations all up and down the 405 in California primarily because of Dr. Samuelson's work on the street model for hydrogen infrastructure. He's key in that. Because of that, California and Southern California will be the launch pad for the hydrogen fuel cell cars that are coming out from almost every manufacturer in 2015. But Scott also, a long time ago, envisioned and created ZEVNet. I believe, I'm going to get corrected, I'm sure, but I believe it's the longest continuously running last mile station car program. And we've had our ups and downs and getting it working. It's still working. And Scott, could you tell us about ZEVNet? How did you start it? How does it work? And why has it lasted so long?
I'll do fine on the first 2 questions. I'm not sure about the last one. Why has it lasted so long? ZEVNet was established in 2002, so 10 years ago. The ZEV stands for, of course, Zero Emission Vehicle. And the vehicles are BEV, battery electric vehicles provided by Toyota. So the RAV4. In the early days of ZevNet, we also had the ECOM that Bill alluded to in his introductory remarks, the prototype city electric vehicle that was very, very popular during its 3 years that it was with us. The NET in ZevNet stands for Network Enabled Transport, and the partner there is Zipcar, who 10 years ago agreed to partner with us and provide the web-based reservation system and the hardware that we still use today, although fortunately and not surprisingly, it's evolved in sophistication over the years. The anchor location for ZevNet is the Irvine Transportation Center, Irvine being about halfway between Los Angeles and San Diego. It's a multimodal center for transportation, and even though Irvine is the largest planned community, or one of the largest planned communities in the United States, and has very open roads for travel, there is a requirement for those doing business in Irvine to reduce the miles driven by any one employee. So the multimodal center has a number of activities, of course, buses and the taxis to meet the commuter trains being operated by Amtrak and Metrolink, but also an entity called SpectroMotion that works with the companies in order to provide transportation alternatives. That's where ZevNet is located, at very prime real estate, right against the tracks where people, commuters getting off and on the train can actually see the ZevNet option. The option is built on a model with corporations, so corporations subscribe. Their employees arrive in Irvine in the morning having reserved a vehicle, and then along with other employees that have joined with them, travel to their place of employment. At the place of employment during the day, fellow employees who are not part of the station commute are able to access the vehicle for personal or business use. And then at the end of the day, the vehicle is reserved to return to the station. At that time, we happen to have a number of commuters who are leaving Irvine in the morning and returning at night, so they're able to pick up the vehicle, get to their home, and then bring it back the next morning. It's like a 24/7 use of the vehicle with very little time sitting in place to be charged. The program is not a business-based program, although we look at the business aspects of it. It's a research program that over 10 years has provided us a gift of remarkable information, particularly at times when it's needed. Even though we thought at times we would not be able to continue the program, it's still ongoing. The rich data set includes telemetry that we've been able to equip the remaining RAV4s with, as well as a GPS capability that, of course, is always fascinating, but allows us to track the vehicle's use every moment, every day, every week. A particular interest to us now in this age is the charging behavior of the drivers, and that data is being used today for informing the state on electric charging infrastructure. So overall, a very successful and rich program with interest always growing. If we only had more vehicles, had a correct policy, and had an investment, the interest and growing demand for this is there. Let me just conclude by mentioning that we have another paradigm shift occurring in this area with the car share companies. The particular example that I want to share is Zipcar, where they have deployed their vehicles on university campuses. We have that at UCI, so we're able to actually watch the engagement of the students in having this option of a car, I think $7 an hour, that they can have access to and not bring their car onto campus. So we're creating through that not only a successful business model, thanks to Zipcar, but also training or allowing a young generation to learn about this option that they find extremely attractive. And it's an ignition point or catalyst point that I don't think we should ignore that it's occurring right now in terms of trends that are evolving in this area of shared use, car use. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a couple of follow-up questions for everybody, just because I want to be cruel. Susan, you mentioned a variety of multimodal sharing. Okay, so it's always interesting because we face this giant budget deficit in the state of California and in the United States, and in fact throughout the world. So, what is the role of government funding in here, and do these programs mostly have exit strategies where they'll get away from funding like the bike share programs, and that they'll be for profit, and if so, how so?
Great question. So on the business model side, many of these types of concepts start out with governmental funding to get them their capital funds, to get some of the cars out there, the bikes out there, and then a lot of work has to happen to try to figure out how do we make this a sustainable business model. What we're seeing in public bike sharing, I'll start with that first, is in Europe where this got started, and we all know about Velib and the expansion over in Europe. That model is much more of what we would call an advertising model. So partnerships with companies like JCDecaux and Clear Channel, where in exchange for having an opportunity to advertise on street furniture in an urban area, they also provide a car sharing service. What's really interesting, Bill, is that in North America, we tried that. It didn't work so well. And what's happening for us is more of a sponsorship model. And what's interesting here is in New York City, I think this is a really notable example that we should talk about, is over $40 million was given by one title sponsor to provide the capital. And New York City has come out and said they will not take a dime of public funding. They're going to figure out how to make this work with a sponsorship model. So I think the business models are really changing. The other thing too, Bill, that I'm sure you're really aware of is there's all of these one-way car sharing services starting to pop up that the automakers are bringing on board. Daimler has brought Car2Go, and it's expanding across the world, particularly Europe and North America, and they've made a multi-million-dollar investment in this system. BMW is doing it with Drive Now. So we see these for-profit generated models. And in car sharing, we see both the for-profit and the nonprofit models. And at this point, most of the car sharing or the traditional car sharing services, including peer-to-peer, are not receiving much governmental support at all. I'd actually like to see more policy support, as Scott mentioned, for all of these options, because I do think while some of the numbers that I've given are really impressive, I'd like to see them a lot bigger.
Eric, you mentioned a fabulous number of new and emerging business models that you see in the future. Very few of those have anything to do with the tent sale that you guys are all familiar with when we start selling cars. Our model is Toyota's model, all the car companies' model, is built on us owning the customer. You come and see us once and we own you, and you'll come back. If we treat you right, you'll come back in 5 or 6 years. The new models are not like that at all, especially when it has electrification. You're plugging your car in, all of a sudden now you're the electric company's customer. There's an incredible amount of telematics going into the car, so you might be chatting with Google or some other space. So Eric, who owns the customer in the future? Who is the customer in the future, and what's the value of an automaker's brand then?
Great, also a great question. So who owns the customer in the future? Honestly, the way I see this happening is, you mentioned the tent sale. The tent sale is all about moving metal and selling as many vehicles as possible. What I see changing is moving from, say, a product-centric sales mode to a more service-based experience or solutions mode, or some hybrid in between. So if you think of, on the one end of the spectrum, you've got, car manufacturers and dealers, which is purely product-centric. And on the other side of the spectrum, you've got full service providers, and these would be like car services, like taxis, for example, or the like. And it's something in between can come a lot of things like car sharing and other and variants of car sharing, whether that's the traditional car sharing model that Zipcar originally introduced, which is the round trip, or some of the more prevalent models today that we're starting to see, like the Car2Go and BMW Drive Now models. What's interesting about these is that you're seeing these firms, which are had been focused primarily on selling vehicles and moving metal, put a marker in these spaces and really get out there and perform trial and error. Because trust me when I say they went into this not knowing a lot, and that's highly risky. It's a highly uncertain market. But the thing is, they've got the resources to do it. It literally just takes the leadership to do it. And in the case of these companies, the leadership understands that things are changing. Customer preferences are changing, and that's being shaped by technological evolution in terms of people's experience with connectivity and their expectations for what transportation is what is possible with transportation. And consequently, their expectations are changing, and that means, if you want to continue to play in the customer's ballpark here, you've got to come up. You got to be better than your competition, basically, and you got to come up with new ways to wow. And doing that within the existing business model is going to be tough. Certainly a tough sell in the United States, even with the introduction of telematics and nav systems and all the whiz-bang stuff. Fundamentally, that is not what I would call anything that's going to be, say, disruptive or transformative. What is going to be transformative, I think, is when we start to move toward a service model and manufacturers actually start to cater to those models. And that will allow a much broader choice of vehicles and vehicle footprints and form factors and capabilities. So instead of seeing, for example, the car that that meets every person purpose, we're actually going to see specific mission-dedicated types of vehicles that do something very well and serve a certain market segment, but it's profitable to do so. Instead of having to make a car that does everything for everybody and has to sell in large volumes in order to recoup the capital expenditures. So that's what I see ultimately happening.
I want to reserve a little bit of time for some questions from the audience, but I do have a question for everybody. What shifts in regulations, investment, and policy need to occur to take what we're discussing from the laboratories into the living rooms? How in the hell do we do it? Start with Dr. Samuelson down there.
Well, there are some disruptive aspects that we are currently beginning to experience that need to be not only addressed in a laboratory in the university, but also the field laboratory in the practical community. What I mean by that is, of course, the electric vehicle, where we have now the evolution of the electric drivetrain in vehicles, whether it's a battery electric vehicle, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or a gasoline hybrid vehicle, even the evolution of the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. So it's important to recognize that transportation is becoming electrically centric. Along with that is another disruptive technology, which is the push for a greater penetration of renewable solar and wind on our grids throughout the world. These mandates, which are often called renewable portfolio standards, are such that we're being pushed into that area in a time when we're not prepared for it from a grid operation point of view. So this penetration is a nuisance to the grid, and we're just now starting to look at how to address that. And then the plug-in vehicles are a nuisance to the grid, but unlike the renewable solar and wind, they also can be an asset to the grid, and that needs to be researched and actually help manage and mitigate the nuisance of the renewable solar and wind. So I think you know what I'm speaking about here. One is the time of charging, the allowance of charging. When can you charge? Are you allowed to charge? And if you do at a certain time, are you charge more? And then the use of the vehicle as a resource for energy storage. That requires the IT, but that's developing very nicely. It also requires, unfortunately, a smart grid. And that's evolving, but slowly. But it is evolving. So the Department of Energy does have a very large project that's been deployed in Irvine called the Irvine Smart Grid Demonstration Project, which is actually a field laboratory in a community to not only explore the smart grid features for the grid itself, such as smart gridding and the managing of VAR and frequency and voltage and so on, but how to manage the plug-in vehicle. And of course, it'll be managed through communication with the grid when it's plugged in. That's a fascinating but critically important part of the future that needs to be researched in response to your question, Bill. Let me also conclude by saying we have an interesting evolution of maybe not disruptive, but certainly a paradigm shift in the vehicle where we have the electric vehicle with battery, the BEV, and then we have this other vehicle with a battery but has a longer range. Today with gasoline, PHEV, the future, the fuel cell vehicle. But with hydrogen on board, in addition to the battery, for also storage. So this combination of the fuel that it powers the vehicle versus the storage of the energy to not only power the vehicle but have other services is a part of the evolving future that is rich for research as well.
Thank you. Can we take some questions? You got some world-class experts up here, and fire away. And the harder the question, some extra credit, okay?
All right, I see one hard question right here, and then we'll take a few questions at once. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, John Addison, Clean Fleet Report. A lot of discussion of new car sharing models, point-to-point electric cars. Of course, here in California, Car2Go, in San Francisco, they are electric. So what are the added challenges of the charging, getting vehicles back to where they need to be, and where do you see that taking car sharing?
Okay, one more question.
My name is Craig DeLon with the Urban Innovation Exchange, and first of all, I want to say I'm really glad that you started talking about the smart grid. I think that's a critical part of what we're dealing with. So I was wondering if you all have already seen or anticipate in the form of actual physical urban design phenomena changes that are going on in reaction to new sorts of mobility in the city. So either something that you're already seeing or things you anticipate in urban design.
And one more question from Washington Post, Neil Pierce. I saw his hand back here. A modest man, but with a big hand.
Thank you, Gordon. We heard some mention of specialized markets, but when I think about automobiles, I think about advertising, and I think about the hundreds of billions of dollars a year that go into advertising of standardized models of cars floating over mountaintops and through spotless mountain valleys with no other car in sight, and that against the expectation of a growing billion member new middle class that McKinsey is projecting for the next couple of decades. It seems to me that could swamp, in terms of numbers, the alternative and interesting types of new uses that you all are outlining. And so the question is, how does one break that habit of the automobile industry to appeal to people who are newly middle class or established middle class? Boy, you get your status through the size of your own personal car.
Great. Because that's what we've got.
Well, it looks like we're out of time. Okay. Okay, I'll answer your clean fuels thing. Yeah, for the electric car involved in car sharing is very, very difficult, and we work with a lot of the car sharing companies to understand that. You've got to keep that car moving, and that's one aspect. The other aspect is when you have existing infrastructure out there, frequently, unless there's an attendant there, the cables, the copper, will get harvested. They harvest copper from street lights, and so how do you protect that? One of the companies that is here that is working on that is Qualcomm, and they're working on inductive chargers, and the inductive chargers are game changers because when you have a conductive charger, you believe that you're going to transmit your communication via power line carrier. With inductive, now you're going wireless, and that just opens the door up to just a giant array of telecommunications opportunities.
And Bill, if I may, another development that I believe we'll start to see is autonomously driven vehicles. And this is something that we probably won't see, or many people will dismiss out of hand when they're talking about their own personal vehicle. But if there's to be an initial market, I think car sharing is an ideal one, where you can employ electric vehicles and they can remotely relocate themselves at a charger or maybe at a denser area where they have a higher probability of being picked up.
Can I just add really quickly on the autonomous vehicle front, because I do think this is the big forefront for shared use mobility, is not just the young kids. Yes, there are transformational things occurring with young folks, but we're working on a project that looks at how we can use autonomous vehicles to help aging baby boomers. So actually creating bookends on the generations. And to address the gentleman's question over here, I would say that yeah, we've got an issue with shared use. How do we expand it from sort of these early generations of people 25 to 35 years old? And I think we have to start to create a shared use model that allows people to go through different lifestyle phases. And we've actually been working on that and have been writing about these types of models that can fill in the gaps and perhaps be more appealing. Peer-to-peer is one model, but another is fractional ownership, which I'd be happy to talk to any of you about in greater detail.
Yeah, Susan, in the emerging market, you've probably done more work there than most of us.
I was going to actually say a different thing, but I'll try and incorporate that in one sentence. I wanted to address Neil's question because I think that we can predict, given the major shift in transportation, that we're going to begin to see ads from the car companies that are going to show how unbelievably sexy the integrated door-to-door, digitally enabled transportation system is going to be, the new mobility grid. And you're going to see people moving seamlessly from their amazing car that they may have shared with someone, or they'll just leave it off, they'll jump onto their bike. That is already beginning to happen, but the sexiness factor is going to grow, and with that, the budget that goes along with it.
And if not the car company, then some mobility service provider who will gladly do the same.
Dr. Samuelson, I think you're
The last word at the end of the panel.
Well, thank you. I just see the timer go to 0. On the urban planning aspect of the question, certainly there's not a solution that's been identified, but there's a lot of activity that we need to take positive thoughts about. One is that we're finding utilities around the country, around the world, are setting up groups. These are electric and gas utilities to look at the community design with respect to how to utilize and deploy these utilities in the communities of the future. We're beginning to see the evolution of systematic methodology planning tools that are actually being used in decision making today for infrastructure that takes into account not only demographics, but what the automobile companies are beginning to see as their markets and the location of their markets as well. And then the third would be the renewable energy again, where we have a consideration by many agencies in the country of how will you design a community in the future to enable a high penetration of renewable energy. These are called RESCO, or renewable energy-based communities. And then transportation is clearly an integral part of that. So that is also, I think, a positive sign going forward. Finally, let me just say that the discussion and implementation today of hydrogen fueling infrastructure is causing decision makers to work with universities, to work with OEMs, but also to work with the community planners. That's where the stations are going. The community planners are starting to say, my goodness, what is this? Just one short snippet. They're excited to find out that only 15% of the existing gasoline stations need to be modified to support an entire population of hydrogen fuel cells. Why is that so interesting to them? Because it reduces the number of curb cuts along a given block, and that allows a freer flow of transportation. So it's a fun era, it's evolving, and I think we should be encouraged by that.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, Bill. Thank you to our panel.
Thank you.